Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tank Talk Podcast, your number one podcast of any genre in the universe and all alternate universes as well. We really appreciate you being here. And why do we appreciate you being here? What do we got for you today? John, what do we got going on?
We have got a very special guest, a personal friend of yours. Him and I just met for the first time today, but we are going to be talking all about when you go hardcore with a fish room and you go automated, fully automated, is something I do not know anything about. So I'm excited to listen to all of it.
Yeah, and one of the things, a long time ago, I did a fish room tour of Jason's fish room from the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. It's an awesome fish room. Jason, thank you so much for being here today, because when we were making our list of people that I thought would be really interesting to talk to, your name was at the top of my brain, because when I went to your fish room, you had a lot of stuff going on there that was next level that I had not seen in a fish room before. I've been to a lot of fish rooms. I've seen a lot of automation, but not quite at the level that you do it. Before we get into the awesomeness of your fish room, just introduce yourself, what it is you keep, what it is you love to keep. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, John and Jason, for having me on. It's an honor to be invited to the show, as I'll call it. So first, thank you very much. My name is Jason Labansi. I'm a member, or I guess I'm actually the president of the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. I've been keeping fish for a long number of years. I grew up in Miami Beach, Florida, snorkeling and catching my own fish, and kind of really going pretty heavy on the cichlids maybe about 10, 15 years ago. I keep a wide variety of fish, mostly cichlids. I do Tanganyikans, I do South Americans, I do Central Americans. I recently got a bunch of West Africans, so I don't have a specific genre that I go for. I really enjoy the BAP program, which is a breeder award program that's part of many clubs, and that's where when you breed an individual species, you kind of track that species and you get credit for that individual species. So that's kind of enabled me to kind of really explore all different types of cichlids across all the different areas or genres.
And one of the cool things is, we were talking beforehand, you have the title Master Breeder, and that means something in the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. Take a couple minutes, talk about what that means in our club when someone is a Master Breeder.
Certainly. So Master Breeder and the GCCA we have a very simple point system. It's 1 point per fish. So if you've done 80 fish, you have 80 points. If you've done 300 fish, you have 300 points. So it's pretty easy to figure out how many species you've bred. I'm at 260 species, which is pretty cool. I think I'm top 6 in the club from breeding the most number of cichlid species. So it's just a really fun way to keep the hobby interesting and always have new fish coming in and new fish and fish going out.
And the other thing too is, you are actually the president of the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. How long have you been with that club, and how long have you been serving as the president? I know it's been a while.
It's been a while. I don't actually know the exact time time frame on all those. I've certainly been the president probably the last 9 years or so, and an active member, before that. It's great, when you're part of a club and you're at that heavy duty level, it's a lot of volunteerism, which is great. You're really doing a lot of work just for the greater good. And we were just talking about, we started adding up how much time you actually spend running a club. And I'm estimating I'm somewhere between 300 and 600 hours of volunteer to run that organization per year.
Wow.
It's a pretty big endeavor, from everything from website support to handling questions to buying food for the picnic to cooking for the picnic to bringing in rare fish for different people. There's a lot to it, and a lot of things behind the scenes. We have a pretty robust website. We've got an active Facebook group. We have integration between those two. I'm a technologist, as we'll kind of dive into it. So I get real geeked out on any type of technology solution and like to be very proud of any type of technology solution.
That's awesome. And thank you for doing all that work as a member of the GCCA. Very much appreciated. Now, your fish room. Like I said, I've been there. I did a tour of your fish room. If you want to see it, check out Primetime Aquatics. Type in Primetime Aquatics, Jason's fish room tour. You'll see it. That was a long time ago. And in fact, what I want to hear from everybody on the podcast, if you want me to go back after watching this podcast, Jason, you and I talked about, I was thinking about doing it beforehand. I didn't get a chance to, but at some point we'll get back over there so we can actually see a lot of what we're talking about today as well. Take me through when you started your fish room, what it was like in the needs that you saw in terms of automation in the early days, like basically the evolution of your fish room from, hey, it's a fish room to, okay, I've recognized some issues. What are those issues and how do we fix them? Make them more efficient.
Uh, Certainly. So, like everybody else, you start off with the fish room and you start keeping a couple of species and a couple tanks. And you're like, okay, I got one tank, and I got two, I got three. And if you really look at the work from a fish room, it's tied to feeding the fish and water changes. Most people are okay with feeding the fish unless you get to those like 100 tank fish rooms, but the water changes become quite a decent amount of chore. And when you're really going into that BAP program, when you're really trying to get fish to spawn, 90% water changes twice a week, your fish love it. They spawn, they grow, they're happy. So, I started getting more involved in breeding fish, and my wife was going out of town, and a close friend of mine, Mario, who you know, Jason, he's like, we need to kind of set up a whole new fish room for you, and plumb it all. And the first step to some of the automation is really getting those drains and those pipes and doing the stands and all that kind of setup. And my wife was out of town with my daughter, and we spent the entire weekend hammering, drilling, jackhammering, plumbing, and kind of setting that all up, which was fantastic, right? So I went from Python style of trying to maintain a fish room to more PVC piped, turning valves to let water in, turning valves to kind of get water out. And that was great. That's kind of like step one of my fish room. And all my tanks are drilled in two places. They're drilled like for overflow right near the top, and then they're drilled about at the 15% mark, where if you open that valve, there's only going to be about 15% of the water left in it. I think, Jason, you've seen that. Like, I really try and get all that water out. So that was great. And, for my job, I'm a technology leader, director for the financial services. And so every day, I'm thinking about how do I build a better mousetrap. I'm thinking about how do I do things more efficient? How can I solve things? What's out there, being curious. So, that kind of drove me to like, okay, this is kind of cool, but how can I do this? Like when I go on vacation, how can I automate this so that, my daughter at the time was pretty young, like while we're having dinner, how can I have a water change going on? And those types of things. So I just really started doing research. And I've gone through probably like 6 different generations of my automatic water changing system. And I first started with valves, like the PVC valves that you had. There's like little devices that will actually turn the handles for you automatically through a Wi-Fi device. And from there, I was like, it worked, but you had to have everything really perfectly aligned. And if you had a really big fish room and you probably had all those valves on a wall, it would work fantastic. From there, I just kept researching and saying, there's got to be a solution, and really found a fantastic device. And I'm not recommending this specific model. I don't even know if you can get this specific model anymore because I've had it so long. There's a lot of Wi-Fi irrigation valves out there. They're designed for farming. They usually, if you cut power on them, they shut close. And when you think about farming, if you flood or you don't put water out to that area of farming, that can cost the farmers a lot of money. So they're actually built pretty well. And I'm going to pop one up right here, if now's a good time. And this is very interesting. This is like one of the hearts of my system right now. It looks like a little spaceship, you can kind of see. It's a little round puck, but all it is a solenoid valve that's hooked up to Wi-Fi. You plug it into a USB, and it's just a valve that you control through Wi-Fi. And you can control these valves and open them up at 5%, 10%, 15%. So you can really do fine grain. When you're draining, the fine grain doesn't really matter because you usually just hit max and you tell it the number of minutes or seconds that you want it to open for. But when you're filling a tank, that's where you kind of do it a little more fine grain than that.
Can I jump in real quick? And I'm the money guy. Like I automatically want to know that one valve right there, because whenever I think of solenoid valves, I think big money. What
Yeah.
does a unit like that cost? And that one unit is to serve one tank only, or would that serve multiples?
Well, it depends on your design and how fancy you want to get. That's a great question, John. So I actually have two of these on every single one of my tanks, one for fill and one for drain. So I don't have the largest fish room. Now maybe up to 16 tanks. That was at 11 tanks for a long time. So it's not giant. Like I'm sure, John, you've probably spoken to people on your show to have like 120 or 200 fish tanks, and that's off the charts. If you wanted to, you could plumb multiple tanks into one of these. They get pretty big, but then you would be sharing water. So if I was going to do this, if I had like a giant fish room, I'd probably do, maybe 10 tanks to one valve. But my fish room's not that big, and I have the advantage where I can spend a little bit more. I was able to, unfortunately, this was pre-pandemic, negotiating on Alibaba. I would order 10 of these at a time, and I had gotten them down to like $35 a piece.
Oh,
But
I mean,
I
that's still a
don't
lot of
think
money, but
I don't think you can get them. You're probably looking a little bit more double that today. Like you're probably going to be more at 70.
I was under the impression you were going to say several hundred each. So that's actually surprising to me. Still big money, but not. Don't have to go get a second mortgage.
No, yeah. But for the amount of time it saves and the healthier fish, and more water. The easier your water changes are, the healthier your fish are going to be, and you save money that way. I mean, so there are different things, and I'm a gadget guy. I'm very curious. Again, I was thinking about I've just pretty much brought my work and everything I practice at work of how to build a better mousetrap. Anytime something fails, how can I make it so it never fails again, right? Everything you do at work, you kind of sometimes bring into your hobby. And I was just thinking about Jason Adams. You're a professor, and then you've kind of combined being a professor with your hobby and kind of with your YouTube channels. And I was like, oh, look at that. Even Jason kind of has brought his work into his hobby. It's very common.
So take us through. Okay, so you've got these solenoid valves. You have one for draining. You have another one for filling. Like practically speaking, then how does this all fit together? How does the system work? How do you turn it on, turn it off? When do you do that? What are the fail safes involved? Because obviously that's probably something people are thinking like, wow, at least when I got my Python, I know how much water I'm draining. I'm there when the tank is filling. So it takes a lot of trust, and you figured all this stuff out. How does it all work?
And I will say I've gone through different evolutions of it. So those Wi-Fi valves are controlled by a little app. I could pull it up if you want,
Sure.
or you can look at it later. So let's see if you can, well, there we go. So you can see this says empty tank 4. So I've named all my tanks, and that says empty tank 4. And if I were to go here right now and change it, I can put empty tank 4 at 5%. So now it's opened at 5%. Now I can say empty tank 4 max. And now you probably see the number kind of going up. If you really look, it defaults to a time up in the left hand, right hand. John, you're going to have to help me which side it is on the screen.
it's a little blurry, so it's hard to see. But
Okay. But basically it defaults to a time. So right now, while we were here, I happen to turn on tank 4 is getting a water change. Water is coming out of my tank 4 right now as we're speaking. It's running for 6 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. So one way of interacting with my system is through my phone. Generally, anything that you have hooked up through your phone can also be used through your voice. And, whenever we had speakers or guests, it's really fun to kind of, ask Alexa to go ahead and begin water changes and have Alexa. I've actually even customized Alexa so that, like, if John was coming over, I would say, Alexa, tell John all about my fish room, and it would announce something. It was pretty fun when we had some speakers
That's cool.
come over. You know, yeah, some technology geek. So that's happening. So you can be standing there. When I first set it up, it was automated, so I could push all the buttons, kick it all off, watch everything. I've set it up so that when the routine would start, it would basically start emptying all my tanks, and then those little plugs that everybody uses for their lights. I would make sure that all my heaters are hooked up into one of these, so that it would turn off all the heaters. So that this way, when you start emptying all the waters, the main power strip for my heaters was kind of shut off. And then everything would be emptied, and then I could sit there either with a soft drink in my hand or a beer, and just watch everything, like, and have a conversation or just chillax or do other things, and all my water's going off and I don't have to do anything. And then I would go ahead and it's basically on a timer for like 10 minutes, and then it would remind me to put dechlor in. And when we play the video for everyone, it will kind of go through this. And then I would push the button for it to turn on, and then all the water would fill up. The turning on, I did play with and got samples of the water filling up, and then a little solenoid actually shutting off the Wi-Fi device. I set it up for 1 or 2 tanks, but it was more just to prove that I could do it. I didn't really need it from that perspective. So that was like one iteration of my fish room automation. And I've been in Dubai and in India and have done water changes from my phone. At that point, I'd only bring it down to 20%, and because all my tanks were filled for overflow, I knew exactly how much to kind of top it off, and I would just slowly bring it up. But I was across the world, and I was doing water changes on my fish tanks. Now, that was pretty cool. That was, high-tech automation. I've now taken it to the next level. Some ways it's more automated, but not as exciting. Right now, I'm still using all my valves. But what I've done is on every one of my tanks, I put this on top of every one of my tanks. And every day, my tanks drop down 30%, and then water flows in, and this shuts it off. So at 5:30 p.m. every single day, they get a 30% water change. I was breeding some discus on that tank. That tank was getting like 35% like 3 times a day. And, I played around with it, where I could get 3 or 4. Because you're only coming down 30%, I don't have chloramines, I just have chlorine. When it would fill back up, I never had to use dechlor. If I do a 90% water change, obviously I had to add dechlor to the system.
Well, and that was going to be my next question: is the water that's refilling your tanks has to come from somewhere. Are you manually dechlorinating just tap water as it goes in, or do you have some type of water storage facility or system, or how are you doing that?
If I go back to these, it's coming straight out of the tap. I have a reducing valve, and this comes straight from the tap with chlorine. I also have it so that I can pop out any one of these little, I call it refrigerator line, it's 1/4-inch tubing. And I have an RO unit. So if I want to switch a tank over between tap and RO, I literally unplug one tube, plug another one in, and then by the end of the week, it would be 100% RO from that perspective. When you're only coming down 30%, there's no dechlor. When I do like a 90% water change, I walk around with powder dechlor and just put in a tablespoon, and off I go.
So how are we going to automate that? You're the tech guy. There's got to be a way to automate putting in dechlorinator.
You could. I'm really having a lot of fun with all these show and tells. I have another device that I really like that I can show all of you guys.
Please do.
So I've experimented. So I've done all these things with the water changes. is. Well, remember that second thing that I said we spend a lot of our time doing? It's
Feeding.
feeding, right? And there's all these, for me, everything's got to be Wi-Fi. It's got to be controlled by my phone. It's got to be controlled by Alexa. I need to be able to create a routine, either automated so it kicks off whenever I want, or kick it off multiple times. And I've gone through some of the Wi-Fi. Excuse me. I went and got a bunch of these, and these are the old ones, and they're not okay, but I had a lot of problems with these, to be honest. They would either put way too much food in, get stuck open, they would tilt, I had to tape them down, they would never really hit the hole in my tank. So recently, some of it's about being curious, I found these things. And it's funny because this almost looks like a school kid created it. It doesn't look so impressive, but the fact that you can just sit it on a tank, it's great for a fish room. And I'm going to open this up. It's got a great cover, so you can pour fish food into here. They have expansion kits. This company should pay me money. They have expansion kits where you can make it so that you can add more food. But what's really cool, and I want to push the button, and it's going to take a little second here. I'm trying to line this up. So I'm pushing the button, and you see that tiny little thing that's popping out right here?
Oh yeah, okay.
That's it.
Oh,
so
that's cute.
It's so precise in how much food it gives. I put these above breeder boxes while I was gone on vacation for 2 weeks, and it fed the exact amount for a breeder box, no problem. I also had it on my show tank, and I was able to, for the show tank, I had it open multiple times. We've designed it so that, look, I've got all these show and tell things.
I love it.
They have these little, I'm trying to put it in the camera, little different openings, so you can adapt the size to four different sizes, or you can even pull it out so it's like the whole thing. Or if, like I mentioned breeder box, look at how small that is. That's that little opening is all the food that would go in every time it opens.
Wow.
But it's also Wi-Fi controlled, so if you wanted to have it open 4 times in a row, to, I've got a bigger 156 gallon tank with a bunch of fish in it. That one I have open 3 times. It's not the biggest setting, it opens 3 times. But the fact that it can be so granular and so precise in the amount of food it puts into the aquarium is fantastic.
That's cool.
All right, so at this point, you've got these aquariums, you've got a drain, you have an overflow, you've got water coming in. You said something that is really, really interesting, and John and I have talked about this before in the past, and that is, you said it a couple times, if you're doing a 30-ish% water change, you're not worried about dechlorinator. And I've always maintained that when I'm doing small water changes, I am not worried if I put dechlorinator in. In fact, you could make an argument that sometimes fish actually respond positively to that. Obviously, you're doing 50, 60, 90% like you do on some of your tanks. That's a different story because that's a lot of chlorine. Chlorine breaks down a lot faster than chloramines do. It's less stable. That's why municipalities switch to chloramine, because it is more stable over time. So you don't really have that issue. We have another advantage, and that is, we'll talk about your filtration in a second, why it's so easy to do all this, but your filtration is definitely an advantage. So at this point, your tanks are being auto drained. Are you basically stuck on at any one time not more than 30% unless there's an extreme situation?
If I have the fish tank doing a water change and I am not present, I am not in the room, which is most of my water changes right now occur every single day, I'm not there. I don't go down to the fish room when the water changes are occurring. I think, you could probably go a little bit more. I wouldn't go too much more. You do have temperature as a concern as well. I have one of those cheap thermostatic valves from a shower, and it doesn't, if I turn on all the tanks to fill it up from the 90%, it adjusts the temperature pretty good. when it's dripping into the system through a little float valve, there's not enough pressure for that solenoid to adjust the temperature. Um, there are those photographic thermostat valves that several of our friends have, but they're like $2,500 for one control unit. That will work at that low level, but that will, like, even on a drip level, it will control the temperature. So most of the time when it's automatically done, it's 30%. If I'm down there and I'm doing a big water change, it's going to drain all the way down to the 85, 90%. If I'm doing it manually means I'm pushing a button on my phone or I'm asking Alexa, by the way. That's manual. If I tell Alexa to do a water change, that's a manual water change for me. An automated water change is, it just happens and I'm not even in the room.
And so you have those in that particular case with your app, you've got that set on a timer. So every day, 5:30, all your tanks drain, all of them refill, and you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, and I did have it 2 or 3 times, and then I just started looking at my water bill, and I was like, maybe should just reduce it down to one time. When the water bill came in and it was like $600, I was like,
yeah, that's for, you said, like,
my wife was asking me, well, why is the water bill $600? I was like, I don't know. The pool?
The pool, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting too, because if you put this in perspective, you're doing around 30% a day, where most people are. I do 30% to 50 on all these tanks once a week. Some people are like, yeah, I'll do that once every few weeks, but you're doing it basically every day. So I would imagine your nitrate concentrations are almost zero, I would think.
I don't. Jason, I haven't checked my nitrates in like years.
Yeah,
That's never a problem for me. I will tell you that the 30% every single day is not as good as the one time 90% once a week. There's a clear, my fish are much happier spawning growth wise. 90% manually once a week is still better than 30%, I think, even twice a day.
That is shocking to me. Do you know why that is? I mean, tell me more about the observations you've made, because in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, 30% once a day, you're having a more stable environment over the course of the week, as opposed to 90%. I mean, although 90% once a week is actually far less new water going into the aquarium than 30% once a day. But what have been your observations there?
Um, and Jason, I can't recall all of the exact science behind this, but it's
No,
something to kind
no,
of
it's just
look at.
your just general
I,
observations.
I believe that people have done, where they kind of track how much is removed when you're, doing a giant water change versus a bunch of little water changes. When you do that giant water change, I find, I don't want to bring in like disease or anything else, but it really just flushes the entire tank out. Like it just, there's like none of the regular water is left. Everything kind of gets cleared out. It really just, you bring that water up and all the fish start immediately going into spawning mode. They start dancing, especially the Malawians are super happy. And by the way, I have done 90% water changes on compressiceps, and I'm great at breeding Tanganyika and compressiceps. My one trick there, as a tip from Jason, is you can do giant water changes. You just can't make that water colder. It needs to be the same temperature or warmer than the actual fish. If you drop that temperature 5 degrees on a compressicep, they will not be happy. If you do a 90% water change and you increase it 5 degrees, they're fine. So everybody says they're not good. Some of the Tanganyikans will say, they're not good with big water changes. I found it's really just the temperature drop that affects them much more than the change of water. So I've just found it helps with spawning. It helps with the health of the fish. The clarity of the water is super clear. My tanks tend to be very, very, very clear, generally.
And I would imagine with those types of water changes, you're getting basically no algae, because again, there's just no food for the algae to really consume. So that's got to play a big role too.
Yeah, I've left my lights on 24/7 for like a month, and I didn't have any algae growth.
Whoa.
Nice. So can we talk a little bit? All right. the water changes, totally awesome. To be clear, then, for if you're doing the 30% water changes, that solenoid is still kicking in so that you can get temperature matched water, right? It's just if you were to trickle it as like a, if you were doing 5% a day, then it wouldn't trigger.
Yeah, when I'm doing the 30%, it's coming in cold,
Oh, okay.
but
All right.
it's dripping. It takes a little while for it to fill up with these little solenoid valves. These little,
Float
these things
valves.
are only $1. Flip valves are only $1 on Amazon. I would say that for the tank to fill up on 30%, 25 to 30%, it probably takes a good 40 minutes,
Oh,
45
so
minutes
your
for it
heater at that point, whenever it kicks back on, is
takes
it's
back on
taking care of
pretty
business
fast.
pretty fast.
Correct.
Do do you even, if you're doing a 25% water change, are your heaters in a position where do you have to turn them off? They still turn off, or are they on if it's just a 30% water change?
No, they're on. They're all, I make sure I try and keep my heaters actually in my tanks as low as possible.
Yeah.
Even for some of my tanks, I could even go down to like that 15%. I really keep a lot of my heaters way low, just in case I'm not paying attention to something. I just try and make those heaters really, really far down on the bottom of my tanks.
So I have a question on that. When you're talking, because we're talking about a couple of different things here. You're talking about the 30% water changes and then the 90 ones. On the 30s, is that, are you draining them 30% and then slowly filling them back up? Or is it just a mixture kind of thing where well, I guess you got a float valve, so that I'm answering my own question. The only way it would engage is if the float valve is open. So, yeah, that was a really dumb
Yeah.
question. And I'm the dumb guy on this podcast, so but so let me go to my next question then, because I like to play devil's advocate, and there's going to be a lot of people asking. We haven't seen the video as of this point yet, but Jason is going to be sending me a video to include in this podcast. You may address this in that, but what about substrates and cleaning substrates? Do you have substrates at all in there, and are you not worried about it because you do so many water changes, or what's the deal with vacuuming out substrates?
Certainly. So I have, I breed lots of cichlids. Another thing that tends to breed in all my tanks is bristlenose. Like all my tanks pretty much have tons of bristlenose, and they breed a lot. I never vacuum my tanks, like ever. I guess I recently did get a pair of newts, and like recently, like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and on that tank, I think I've had to siphon stuff out because apparently they're not the best eaters and they make a mess. But I did set up automation on the newt tank too, which is another design. For the first couple days it wasn't automated, and then I automated it. But going back to your question is, all my tanks have sand on them. They're all Mystic White pool sand. So there's one pool sand, very popular among the GCCA community. It's Mystic White. You can usually get it at a higher end pool store, but you're still talking like 10 to 20 bucks for the giant bag of the Mystic White. And it's pool sand. Doesn't I never have had a need to really vacuum any of my sand. I don't have gravel, so maybe if there was gravel, there would be more of a need to actually vacuum.
That makes total sense. If it's sand, it might as well just be bare bottom because it's all just going to ride there on the top anyway. So, yeah, that makes total sense.
And the nice thing too is if it's you're keeping mostly cichlids, you mentioned the bristlenose, they're stirring that stand up. That sand is not stationary. They are fish that like to interact with the substrate, so it's getting into the water column and it's getting sucked up into your filtration, which I definitely want to address here because as we're talking about the water change perspective, what types of filtration are you running on your aquariums?
All different types of sponge filters. I've got a lot of the Swiss Tropical uh, matin cubes. I've got a couple tanks where it's a matin filter in the back and a matin filter corner. Um, a couple of those eBay type Amazon type sponge filters that, little green ones with dual that sit up top. It's all sponge filters and just different formats of sponge filters. I generally set up all my tanks with two sponge filters, so there's redundancy in case one ever gets clogged, or if I want to go change them. Like, I'm one of those people, again, I believe on, like, I take that sponge filter out, and I put it in the sink, and I spray it down with a hose and clean everything out and then throw it in, and then, the other sponge filter is still sitting in there.
Yep. I do the same thing. I did a science series video on why that's perfectly okay, perfectly safe, nothing happens. And I'm sure, just like me, you've cleaned your sponge filters in the sink millions of times and never had any issues after
Never.
doing so. So,
Never.
all right. So we covered water. We've covered sponge filters. John, what else you got?
Excuse me. See, this is scaring me already, so I'm coughing because I'm scared. I grew up in construction and heard a lot of stories that started with, 'cause I live in the country, so the story started off with, yeah, that daggone solenoid valve got stuck open and flooded the whole place. So do you have some kind of fail safes in place to where you're not going to be in Dubai and your tanks are overflowing? How do we handle that?
Well, there's 2 points to it. One, if you look at my automation, it's occurring during the drain process every day. The water valves, if they do get stuck, they will give you a notification saying, "Hey, it's failing to close." Um, I had a scenario where I had albino and they like to really distribute the sand, and everything was going fine. And I came home one day and noticed my tank was completely on the bottom. All the water, I'm sorry, was empty, and cold water was filling in, and I did lose the tank. What had happened was the Captodon had pushed massive amounts of sand into the drain. Like, it was like the day before everything was fine, I have little elbows in the bottom of my tanks, and basically what happened was the valve got stuck open with sand, and fresh water was just continuously dripping in. I don't think it was really chlorine that got them. I think it was just basically cold water that ended up getting them. It was nonstop. The heater couldn't keep up with the temperature change. I have thought of ways in which I could handle that. All you need to do is put a solenoid valve on the fill and then open it for a half hour. So from that perspective, I do also have ring cams above my
Smart.
fish room, so I can like look at all of my aquariums, and if something was going on, I've got a good network of other club members that could come over my house and check on anything. If I was like, I do go on vacation for 2 weeks at a time. I used to have them kind of feed the fish once in a while and check on the fish. Now they kind of come in like, all the tanks are full of water and they're all being fed. There's really nothing for me to do. I was like, okay, cool. You looked at everything, double checked it.
It's nice to have that peace of mind for sure.
Um, you know, if you want, you can always do double valves from a redundancy perspective. Um, it does give you alerts. You can pay for a service where it will actually send you a text message should something go on. I haven't really done that. I think I've been running these things for about, I want to say over 8, 9 years, a really long time. I've had two things where it failed. Um, Normally, if there's ever an issue, it just auto closes. And the other cool thing that these valves have is they have little batteries in it. So if you lose power, they have enough
Oh, nice.
battery in it to actually, they're designed to fail closed. Which if you are looking for valves, make sure that they are designed to fail closed, not open. That's an extra layer. So you can just do additional redundancy.
You mentioned in the very beginning how you have two of those solenoids on each tank. Um, I would imagine one is for your supply water and one is for the bottom drain, correct?
Yes, correct.
So, or is one attached to both drains? Because you have two drains in each tank, correct?
Yeah, one's attached to just the bottom drain. The top drain, which is just an overflow, goes straight out. into the PVC.
So
Or
that's
system.
your fail safe there for not overflowing tanks.
Yes, correct.
That would be my main concern. Yeah, would be overflowing tanks. Now, did you drain all of these tanks, or excuse me, drain? Did you drill all of these tanks yourself? Because I've always been
Yes.
terrified of that.
I've drilled lots of tanks. One of the big jokes is that I have several two. If it's in the fish room, it is drilled, and I have several 2.5 gallon tanks that are drilled. It's and I have a video. I give a little fish talk of a pair of jewels breeding because they were paired up when I grabbed them. Saw them at a pet store and they were paired up. I threw them in the 2.5 gallon fed them bloodworms, and there's a spawn, like a pair of jewels and a whole spawn in a 2.5 gallon. And it was drilled in two places. So 5 gallons are the only one that I ever found difficult to drill. 5 gallons I break. It's just the glass seems thinner than the 2.5, and you've got like additional height. So it's not actually the drilling process. It's actually once you put the bulkhead on and then put any type of pressure on it, you'll
Mm,
break it. But I have drilled fives too.
mm.
Nice. All right. So the have you done anything with any kind of moisture detectors in your fish room where that would alert you, hey, water's actually on the floor?
Um, I haven't. I have done. They now have on Alibaba, AliExpress. You can do Wi-Fi temperature alerters, and I did order one of those, and they work pretty well. You can set like if your tank gets too cold or too hot to send you a message, and I think that's great. Heaters tend to fail quite frequently, and having something that will alert you um, that your temperature has gotten too hot or too cold, I think is fantastic. I did I did have a there's those water sensors which will detect water and
Mhm.
kind of beep really loud. I didn't have one of those. They're little frog-like devices that if there's water on the floor, it kind of screams.
Yeah, I have one of those on my security system, and I had to turn it off because my wife and I always get water on the floor when we're when we're doing maintenance out here, and so yeah, those had to be turned off real quick.
Now, some of the other things, and my fish room kind of goes beyond, let's say, automation, and it's just technology in the fish room. Some other things that I kind of experimented was with little e-tags so that you could have a label of all your fish instead of writing it. There's those people who have that fantastic handwriting. Well, I always got like that C in handwriting when I was in third grade. So, but I love the computer, so I thought this was a lot of fun from that perspective. Everybody's kind of hooked these up to their aquarium lights, so you can turn on your aquarium, you can ask Alexa. But one thing that I've done as a breeder is I put these up to my heaters, and for fish that you need a trigger through cold temperature, you can set it up so that for 12 hours every week, turn off your heater. It's a great way to maybe trigger Cories or Central American cichlids or something like that. Just have this running and then turn off that heater automatically once a day. Improve the breeding. Um, that's pretty neat. And I think the other device that I've had, you can see it right over my left, right here. I have a 3D printer. Um, there's a guy, I don't know if I'm supposed to recommend other YouTube. There's a guy in Lowell. I don't know if you've seen Lowell's Fish Room. I've never met the guy, but I think he's an actual engineer by trade, and the products that he designs from a 3D perspective are fantastic. And then you can get a little subscription, download these, and print. So I printed. These are for breeding like tetras and stuff. He's got breeder boxes that are amazing that you can download. He does some pretty cool 3D printing. He actually has the templates where you can actually download, and if you have a 3D printer, how to print them. So a lot of cool
Yeah,
tech in the fish room.
I've always been fascinated with those 3D printers, but they intimidate me. But I've been telling my wife we need to get one because you can do all kinds of fun stuff with those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're getting more turnkey. Like I got one a long time ago, and you'd have to be somebody who likes to fix it all the time. Like it would never work flawlessly. It was like if you hate technology problems, it was always never worked. Now the newer ones kind of just print,
Nice.
which is nice.
That is awesome. And like I said at the beginning, if you are interested in seeing more of his fish room, check out the older video I did, but there's a lot of the tech stuff our focus was on the fishnet video. If you want me to go back and do a tour, Jason and I have already talked about it. If there's interest there, absolutely would love to get back there and actually see this stuff in action because it is pretty darn cool. I remember being there and you took some of those tanks down to 90% and the fish are kind of like, all right, man, let's go ahead and get it filled up. And boom, filled it right back up. Your tanks are in outstanding shape. It's awesome.
Well, it would be amazing if you could go over there and do that, and then we could just put it at the end of this video. Hey, how about that?
I don't know if it'll be that soon, but
no pressure.
yeah, but definitely.
Jason, come on over.
Yeah, I definitely
go over there this afternoon. No big deal.
Yeah, we'll definitely work some stuff out so I can get back over there because it's a really enjoyable time. Well, we're coming up right on that hour, and to be respectful of your time, I want to make sure that we wrap up on time because we really, really appreciate you being here and sharing just some of the stuff that you've done. It truly is an amazing fish room and probably it is the most high-tech fish room I've ever seen. It's next level stuff. So now you mentioned real fast, are you on the speaking circuit scene?
Yeah, yes, I do maybe one per year.
Okay.
When I have given the talks, what I thought was most interesting is I thought it was going to be all the young kids that were interested. And it was a lot of people that were getting up in age and they saw their fish room and they're like, how do I make things easy? They were definitely the people that come up and spend the most amount of time and are very curious because, if they have 90, 80 fish tanks and, I'm not going to put a number out there, but you start getting up there in age, it becomes a little harder. So there's definitely a lot of people that are saying, how can I keep my hobby going and make it a little easier for me?
No, that's awesome. Well, again, thank you. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with us. Thank you for showing us some really cool stuff, and hopefully it gives people some ideas. I'm sure I will see you at the next GCCA swap here coming up in a couple weeks, but thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, everybody, hope you really enjoyed it. Thanks for spending another bit of time with us on the Tank Talk podcast. As always, we'll see you same time, same place next week. Have a great week.
Alexa, begin water changes.
I am starting to empty aquariums 4, 5, 6, and 7 by opening the drain valves to 100%. I am also turning off all your heaters and pumps. Don't forget to add decor to your tanks.
Alexa, fill tanks.
I am beginning to add water to tanks 4, 5, 6, and 7 by opening the fill valves at 50% for 12 minutes. After 10 minutes, I will turn on your heaters and pump for the fish room.
Turn off tank 7.
Turning off the water fill for tank 7.
Alexa, turn off tank 5.
Turning off the water fill for tank 5.
Turn off tank 4.
Turning off the water fill for tank 4. Auto turning off tank 6.
One of the main components of my automated water system is Alexa. And this is the Alexa app. And I'm going to show you real quick on one of the routines I've created. It's called Begin Water Changes. So Begin Water Changes, what I've done here is I've set up sayings, and there's a couple sayings I've added on how I want Alexa to start the water changes. And then the first thing it's going to do, you can see here, is it shuts off the heaters and pumps. So before you empty any tanks, you want to do that. And then Alexa announces what she's doing. So this way I'm alerted that she's beginning it. Then she'll go ahead and it'll start emptying all the tanks. And then I put a wait in there for 5 minutes. And then I give myself a little reminder for dechlor. I have not automated dechlor in any way. And then I add another wait 5 minutes. And then I announce it's been 10 minutes after beginning water changes. All the tanks are kind of set up right now for about a 12-minute empty on all the water changes. And this all comes out of the box with just any $25 Alexa that you buy from Amazon. You get this app and you get Alexa that can control all these things. One of the other things I've automated in my fish room is feeding the fish. Alexa, activate fish feeding.
Feeding all fish tanks in the fish room living room and in Ashley's room.